Well, this week we're going to be talking about the ideas of Nassim Nicholas Taleb and concepts of antifragility, concepts of the black swan, basically concepts about volatility and the unexpected. I think there's a whole family of ideas here that are very exciting and very interesting and important for understanding organizations. However, and for that matter, important for understanding ethics. His books are sweeping, they are immensely exciting, very creative. They're also really hard to summarize. And so I was looking for a few pages I could have you read to say, all right, here's the core of the idea. And really, I can't identify a few pages for you to read. These ideas are spread over 4 books and very intriguing style, exploited for all sorts of contexts. So it's just hard to come up with a summary. But I thought we would start with the idea of a black swan and see if we can work from there. What is a black swan? Well, the story goes like this. The concept really comes from the traditional thought that swans are white. People had encountered white swans. They encountered many, many white swans and assumed that all swans were white, though no one really understood why. But there's a lot we don't understand about the coloration of birds, so that's not so surprising. In any event, it wasn't until, I think it was a little more than 100 years ago, that someone was in a remote region of Australia and discovered a black swan. It was a bird that looked very much like a swan, and then further research indicated, yes, it really is biologically a swan, but it is black instead of white. And so people had been compiling a huge amount of confirmation of the thesis that all swans are white. And in fact, if you thought, okay, how does the inductive evidence go for the claim that all swans are white? What would it look like? We start at a certain level. We think, well, okay, we've seen one white swan, that's some evidence, but it's not such strong evidence. And then we see more and more white swans, so our confirmation keeps going up until finally we meet a counterexample and boom, probability that all swans are white goes to 0. Okay? Now, the thought is that a black swan is a kind of unexpected event, an event that upends our concepts of how things were working. We can be a little more specific than that. So let me talk for a moment about Donald Rumsfeld and a useful division that I talked about in the business ethics class. We can talk about things I know and things I don't know. That's sort of the first order distinction. But then we can also distinguish the things that I know that I either know or don't know, and the things I don't know that I know or don't know, okay? So this is all first order. But second order, we can think, well, do I know it? So I might be, hey, I know that. I know. Or here, I don't. Presumably, there are things in all of those categories. There is an epistemological thesis known as the KK thesis, which is that if I know something, then I know that I know it, which would imply that this is actually empty. But I think that thesis is pretty obviously false. There are things I know that I don't know that I know. And it also seems to me there can be things I don't know, and I don't know that I don't know them. So let's start with these. There are things that I know that I know that I know. What's an example of something you not only know, but you know that you know it? Sorry. Go ahead. Cartesian here. Okay. I know that I am. I know that I know that I am. Actually, Descartes really doesn't make explicit the chain here, but Augustine does, which is where Descartes' getting all of that. Augustine refutes the skeptic by saying, look, I know. And I know that I know that I am, and I know that I know that I am, and I know that I know that I know that I am. Moreover, he says, I think that I am, and so I know that I think that I am, and I think that I know that I think that I am, and so on. I can keep adding those up. And moreover, he says, I love it that I am. And so I love it that I love it that I am, and I know that I love it that I love it that I am. And so loving and knowing and thinking can all be sort of piled onto one another. Okay, so that's an example, but there are lots of other things you know that you know. 2 plus 2 is 4. Okay, you can think, yeah, I know that. 2 plus 2, 4, okay? I know that, I know that, I know that. Other examples.
Use another Cartesian example. All squares have 4 sides.
All squares have 4 sides. You say, I know that, I know that, I know that. Okay, there are things that you don't know, but you know that you don't know them. Now, what's an example of something like that? Yeah.
Like how to derive Schrodinger's equations.
Good. How to derive Schrodinger's equations. You could say, I know that there are such equations. I don't know what they are. I know that I don't know what they are. I know that I can't derive them. And so you could say, look, there are a lot of things I know I don't know. Other examples of things you know you don't know.
How to drive a stick shift.
How to drive a stick shift, yeah. Best anti-theft device these days. Just have a manual transmission. It's getting harder and harder to find those. I've usually driven in cars with manual transmissions. My older daughter loves them, and that was one of her main criteria when she went shopping for a car recently. If you want a new car that's a manual, it's really hard to find. I mean, there are a few brands that still make quite a few, but most, it's sort of rare now. And you might know, I don't know how to drive that kind of car. So that's something you might know that you don't know. So what about these categories? They're the trickier ones. I know something, but I don't know that I know it. Now, it's hard to answer that one in the first person, right? You can't really fill it in for yourself. So think about something that someone you know knows, but they don't know that they know it. Yeah.
But I'm curious if getting knowledge that you derive from knowledge that you have, maybe mathematical proof would fall into that category.
Okay, yes. So there might be things that you know that you don't know that you know because you don't realize that this is entailed by something you already do know. Is that am I understanding you correctly?
What goes up to that?
Yeah. So you've got this piece of information, this piece of information. If you were prompted, you could actually, let's say, put them together. But you've never thought about them together. And so you don't realize that you already know that. It's like you've got the pieces of the puzzle, but you haven't yet gone like this. So that could be an example. Others, yeah.
There's things that we haven't accepted yet, or things that are haven't been actualized. So there's been no intellect. Often, my friend, there's this guy, and it's obvious she likes him, but she hasn't accepted it yet.
Okay, yes. So there might be, it might be that you know something, but the situation where you have to actually make that knowledge explicit to yourself or to someone else has never come up. So it's just not something you've ever thought about knowing. This can sometimes happen in trivia contests, which I tend to participate in, much to my humiliation. It's good for my sense of humility, really, to find out how little I know. Because when I started this, I thought, I'm going to be a master at this, right? I've got a great memory. I'm going to know all that. And then you find out, oh yeah, there's a huge amount that you don't know. But you also find out there are a lot of things I know that I didn't know that I knew. Something happens and your brain immediately associates this. It never came up before, right? But it turns out, hey, that's somewhere hidden in there was the knowledge of that. I think practical things are even more like this. All sorts of things you've never had to do. You probably know how to do. It's just that it's never come up. So you don't know that you know how to do that. It's maybe part of your biology that you know how to do that. Actually, being a parent is like that. There are all sorts of books on parenting, and there are some parents, when they're about to have a child, that read all these books, thinking, oh, I better figure all this out. My view is, look, humanity survived for thousands and thousands of years before anybody read these books. And so you already largely know how to be a parent. Don't worry about it, okay? Evolution is smarter than the authors of these books, and you'll tend to do, if not exactly the best thing, at least something that will keep everybody alive. Now, you know, I do get these Facebook postings about things that happen in Florida, so I understand that this is not universally applicable, but in general, you know, this is true. So, yeah, I don't know if you saw this story. Well, I shouldn't distract you with the latest of these, but the woman who was with her son in Walmart, and he ended up stripping naked while she let a dog roam all around.
Wait, have you seen the meme about like if you type in your birthday and then like or type in Florida, like something comes up?
No, I didn't know that.
It's like a challenge.
Yeah.
Like you type in your birthday, so like make it, there's something then like Florida, and like there's some like
And on
there's
news
a bunch of
articles.
Wow.
With something outlandish.
I say, oh my gosh, well, it's,
every day.
Yeah, mine was just a lot of bath salt incidents.
I mean, mine was like some weird like man that like went naked places. It was just,
well, all of this whole thing is,
Probably happened.
this was all a distraction so that she could steal something. And in the end, all she got away with, by the time she got to the parking lot, was one little box of Jiffy corn muffin mix.
That's
You
a
could
win.
buy it for like 30 cents.
That's a good game.
So anyway, but there are things you know that you don't know that you know. However, there are also things you don't know, but you don't know that you don't know them. Now, that is the sphere of the unknown unknown, as Roosevelt put it. And he said, this is what you have to be afraid of. Because as you're going into making a decision, there are things you know, and you know that you know them. And so it's like, okay, we've got this established, we've got this established. Now be careful, because you might know that all swans are white. And you're just waiting for this situation. But hey, you think you know this, you know that you know it, let's say. There are things that you are aware you don't know. Like, we're going to introduce this product, but we know a couple of other people are working on similar ideas. Are they going to beat us to market, or are we going to be the first one to market? We don't know that. And so we know that we don't know it, and we know that makes a difference. We know certain things that we don't even know that we know, but we trust our organization. There are things that we have as strengths that we haven't really thought about. But this is the scary bit. There are things we don't know that are relevant to this decision, and we don't even know that we don't know them. Why? Because we haven't even thought about that, right? This is unanticipated. This is unpredictable. So now some of these might be unknown unknowns just because, for example, there might be things we don't know, but we think we do. We think we know all swans are white, and we're wrong about that. But it can also be that this is something that is rare, it is unpredictable, and it's going to have a big effect. So among these, not all of them are like this, but among these are things that Taleb refers to as black swans. These are events that are rare. They are unpredictable in advance. Though often, retrospectively, you can give some explanation for them and make some sense of them. And they have a huge impact, an extreme impact on the way things go. Now, why worry about those? Well, he says, look, the most important human events fall into this category. Think about the things that have happened over the past century that have had the greatest impact on the world. What are some of them?
9/11.
9/11, good example. Okay, the September 11th attacks had a huge impact. That was a great example of a black swan. A rare event, one that was unpredictable, though retrospectively you can look back and say, oh, we should have been anticipating this, blah, 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 blah. But the fact is, at the time, nobody did predict it. And in advance, you might say, there's just this fog of a massive information, but most of that information is irrelevant. It was impossible for anyone to predict it in advance. And it has a huge impact on the history of the world. So that's a great example of this sort of black swan. Now, what are some other examples of things that have had a huge impact over the past century? Yeah.
The Protestant Reformation, starting when Martin Luther decided to nail something to a church.
Well, it's not in the past century, but yes. Okay, Luther nails his 95 Theses to the church door in Wittenberg. That's something that has a huge impact on world history. But it was unpredictable. It wasn't as if the Catholic Church, you know. Now later, they can maybe explain it, and historians can explain it, but it's not as if in 1500 people could have said, now, you know, what do we think are the biggest problems facing the church in some papal council? Somebody says, well, you know, I think there's this one guy in Germany. Right now he's a child, but look, he's going to grow up and he's going to be a problem. No, nobody thought that, right? Nobody had any basis for thinking about that. So yeah, that's something that had a huge impact on world history. And it's not something that was really, and it's pretty rare, I mean, that something has that kind of impact. You might be able to explain it later. You're not going to be able to predict it in the future. Yeah?
What about something like the internet?
Good. These things aren't always terrible. The rise of the internet. Is that something that could have been predicted? It's easy in retrospect to say, well, you know, gosh, I mean, I was on email as early as 1982 because I was part of the DARPANet, or the ARPANET, the thing created by DARPA, that was a way for researchers to communicate with each other. And so, you know, I guess, gosh, shouldn't I have foreseen the rise of, why didn't I get the idea to create Amazon or whatever? But the fact is, nobody really saw the potential for this. It seemed like this, nifty way for defense installations and researchers to communicate with one another. Nobody sort of thought, it's going to be something used by almost everybody in the globe to order, you know, various kinds of things online, and to buy birthday presents, and to trade greeting cards, and to look at pictures of other people's cats. Nobody thought about that. And so that's had a huge impact, but it's the kind of thing that was largely unpredictable. Yeah?
The Great Depression, and that's like to let an economist, so it's kind of the same area.
Good. Great Depression, same kind of thing. That a recession is going to happen, that's predictable, although people often joke. Oh yes, economists have predicted 9 of the last 4 recessions. So, you know, it's hard to get those right too, but to have something huge like that comes out of nowhere. And so you might say, yeah, you might go back and try to explain it, but at the time no one could predict it. Yeah?
Isn't this almost tautological? Because since the future is by definition unpredictable, then everything's a black swan?
Well, it's not, I mean, I'm going to drop this. Predict what will happen.
It's going to
Okay, you might not have predicted that I would catch it. but you can predict that it's going to fall, right? Even though that was a future event. So it's not like the future is completely unpredictable. Or you're at a baseball game, batter comes to the plate, and you think, I'm going to make a prediction. I realize this is very risky because the future is essentially unpredictable, but I'm going to go out on a limb. The pitcher is going to throw the ball. It's like, well, yeah. Do you think he's going to get hit? Oh, I don't know. But I predict he'll stand there and the pitcher will pitch the ball. That's a pretty safe prediction, right? So it's not as if all of the future just consists of the unknown, the black swans and so on, but a lot of the big events are. The day-to-day stuff matters much less. So one point is, look, this is what really has the largest impact on events. Yeah?
Well, couldn't you argue that like these great events are kind of the sum of like these small things, kind of like if you look at a Fibonacci spiral, it like starts off really small, but like it ends up just being this huge like spiral after a while, but that's only because of what happened in the past, so it's kind of like a fractal and leads to like greater uncertainty after each iteration.
Well, yes. In fact, one of the things that really inspires Taleb's analysis is Mandelbrot's theory of fractals. So yes, in fact, he wants you to say, stop thinking in terms of bell curves and Gaussian distributions. Stop thinking in terms of sort of the ordinary expected outcomes of probability theory. Roughly, he would say the utilitarian is somebody who is going after, and for that matter, the traditional decision theorist is thinking in these terms, basically saying, well, look, I realize things can be far out on the tail of the bell curves, but you know, most of the time we're in here. He refers to that area of the bell curve as mediocristan, okay? And describes sometimes his theory as the theory of things with fat tails. In other words, where a lot of things, and the most important things, are out here. And so, indeed, fractals are one way of thinking about this kind of structure. When you realize that's the case, sometimes the same structure is reproduced in a way that makes less and less difference. but sometimes it's reproduced in ways that make larger and larger differences. And so this is something that suggests that you have to look at the tails of the distribution rather than the mean to really understand events. Now, here there are two different strategies. You could think, well, look, I'm going to worry about the day-to-day stuff, and I'm going to try to get that right. Of course, we can't foresee extreme events, but hey, I'm not going to worry about that. I'm going to try to do well day-to-day. So imagine two traders on the floor of a stock exchange. One has all sorts of charts and theories and explanations and says, I'm going to try to maximize my day-to-day returns. That's the key to long-term success. Another trader says, I don't worry about any of that. I just want to be in a position that when the market makes a big move, I can profit from that, okay? Which is the more rational strategy? Now, most investment houses, most brokerages and so on, they take that first strategy and they have huge research divisions that are dedicated to that. But floor traders, and that's what Taleb did for a while. He got a PhD in management, and then he worked on the floor as a trader. And he realized these guys I'm working with, most of them don't even, not only did they not have degrees in finance or economics or anything, most of them haven't even gone to college. A lot of them aren't really high school graduates, but nevertheless, they're very good traders. What on earth are they doing? There was one guy who made a fortune selling and buying green lumber. Well, Taleb went to talk to him. He realized this guy doesn't know what green lumber is. He thinks it's lumber that's painted green, okay? In fact, it's, raw lumber. It's like just been cut down. It's before it's dried and cured and all of that. But he didn't really know anything about lumber. He just was good at trading things, and he specialized in that. And he could read the signals of the marketplace extremely well, but he had no idea what was going on. And then he looked at people selling and buying oil in the lead up to the Iraq War. And they were, the big investment houses had huge divisions. They had people studying the geopolitics of the Middle East. They knew all about which wells were where and what were possible sources of political and economic volatility. And these guys on the floor, the one guy who was the best oil trader he knew was somebody who didn't actually know where Iraq was. Like, I don't know, who cares? Doesn't make any difference where it is or what's going on there. His sense was, yeah, people are too concerned about this war thing. But war and oil, not the same thing. Don't worry about any of that. Just follow what's happening with the price. And as the price went up before the war, people anticipating war, and they thought, man, the price is going to soar if war breaks out. He said, too worried about it. And so instead, he positioned himself so that he would profit immensely when the price dropped. And indeed, war broke out, and with the result, the price of oil dropped because people's anticipation was actually worse than the actual event. And so this guy made a fortune, okay? But he not only didn't understand the Middle East, he didn't know that Iraq was in the Middle East. Just like, it doesn't matter. I just know people are being irrational. And so the point was really this. You don't have to understand events. You have to understand their effects, and you have to understand what happens if there is one of these black swans. You're not going to be able to predict this. You're not going to be able to understand it. And your day-to-day profits can be wiped out in one black swan event. You can be doing great all the way along. Suddenly, Black Friday hits on October of 1929, you lose everything. Somebody else can be positioned where, like day to day, they're not doing so well. Maybe they're hardly trading at all. But they've got themselves positioned so that there's an extreme event, they win big. So Taleb develops the idea from this, that what we really want in a system, and what we want in an individual pattern of decision making or living, but also what we want for an organization, is to be able to cope with these situations, okay? Doesn't matter really so much what you're doing day to day, except insofar as it helps you deal with these extreme events. So he categorizes things in three categories. There are things that are fragile, other things that are robust, and then some things that are anti-fragile. What's the difference? Well, basically the fragile hates volatility. It stands to lose from volatility, from change, from uncertainty. Most artificial things are like this. This piece of chalk is artificial. What happens if I drop it not just into my hand, but on the floor? It might well break. Maybe it will survive, but it might break. Even if it doesn't break, it might weaken the bond so that the next time it's more likely to break. Suppose I take a glass and I toss it into the fireplace. People seem to do that in movies. I've never seen anybody do it in real life. But suppose somebody does that. They drink the champagne and they throw the glass in the fireplace. Is that good for the glass? No, right? It breaks the glass. And so these are things that stand to lose from volatility. A robust thing tends not to lose from volatility. It can withstand volatility. It can withstand risk. It is not harmed. On the other hand, it doesn't really improve either. If I take a piece of steel and I drop it on the ground, it's not going to break. On the other hand, it's not going to get stronger, right? It's just not affected by that. An anti-fragile thing actually gains from volatility. It gains from stress. It gains from at least some degree of resistance, of shock. So, what are some things that aren't just, well, we talked about what's fragile. What are some things that neither gain nor lose? They're just unaffected by this.
Cement.
Say it again?
Strong cement.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, something that is sort of strong, let's say some cement. If I drop this on the cement, will the cement be injured? No, it'll take a really pretty big force to harm it, right? When we think about building buildings so they can withstand earthquakes, we're talking about making them less fragile, more robust. On the other hand, it's not as if an earthquake is going to take even one of those very strong fortified buildings and make it any better off, right? It just won't really harm it. What are some things that actually gain from stress? Gain from having shocks applied to them? Yeah.
I guess the way that muscles grow.
Muscles, exactly right. Taleb is, by the way, a bodybuilder. Well, no, that's not quite fair, but he does lift weights, okay? And weightlifting is a good example. What happens when you lift weights? Well, you're actually stressing muscle fibers. You're maybe even tearing down muscle cells. But what does the body do up to a certain point? Now, nothing is going to gain from extreme shocks, right? You say, you think you will gain from lifting weights? Yeah, take this 1,000-pound barbell. Right? That's not going to help me. But what happens is the muscle is stressed, but then it rebuilds and it strengthens itself. So eventually, you can look like me. Or, well, yeah. You can do better. There are limited things you can do when you start weightlifting after age 40, which is what I did. But anyway, yeah, muscles gain from at least some degree of stress. They get stronger. Other things that get stronger as a result of this, yeah.
Children and humans in general.
Good. Humans in general, in fact, organisms. So if the artificial tends to be in this category, and it's hard to make artificial things strong to resist shocks, well, the organic tends to be in this category. Nietzsche said, what doesn't kill me makes me stronger, right? And there are limits to that, obviously. But in general, yeah, suppose you take a child and you never put them in a situation of stress. Actually, parents these days do a lot of this. It's amazing how this has changed. When I was a kid, especially in summertime when we didn't have schoolwork to worry about, early in the day, you just say, bye, Mom, I'm going to go play with my friends. And you just disappear for the day. And we'd often be a long way from anybody's house and so on. I used to live for a while on the edge of a woods. We'd all just go off to the woods and we'd play various games and so forth. And we were gone all day. None of our parents knew where we were. Nobody cared, really. And, we dealt with things on our own. We got into fist fights and stuff like that. But, nobody sort of intervened. People came home with bloody noses. How did that happen? Or occasionally with like sticks stuck through their hand. That happened to me. But that, I mean, I fell and that happened. It wasn't like somebody drove it through my hand. Still wasn't very pleasant. But anyhow, that we just dealt with those stresses on our own. They made us stronger. The thought was, look, if you protect somebody from any kind of stress, it's kind of like what happens to a muscle. Let's say you are lying in bed and you're in traction after an accident. A friend of mine was in a motorcycle accident and was actually in traction for like 3 weeks. What happens to the muscles if you're just lying there for 3 weeks? They atrophy. You get a lot weaker. So in general, organic things rely on a certain amount of stress to get stronger. Well, that's one way of thinking about this distinction. Now, it is important to realize that in organic systems, it's often the system that gains, even though the individual organism loses. So sometimes evolution happens not because stresses happen and we all get stronger, but because some of us, the weaker ones, die out. And the population that's left is stronger, but not because we got so much stronger, because the others died out. People have thought about why people who survived prison camps, let's say in Nazi Germany or Soviet Russia, ended up often coming out and seeming like incredibly strong people. Whoa, being in prison for those years must make you really strong. And Teller points out, well, not really. It's just the weak ones didn't make it. And so the survivors are really strong, not so much because going to prison is a great way to get strong, but because the people who were weak in those extreme environments didn't survive. So the population ended up coming out looking very strong. And you might think evolution as a whole is like that. The population gets stronger and stronger, even though each individual might actually perish along the way. Now, if we think about an organization in these terms, we can ask, well, okay, we'd like for our organization to be over in this category, especially if we think the most important things that are going to really shape our future together are these black swans that are really unpredictable. Then we want to be able to set ourselves up to gain from those. Now here, errors are dangerous, right? But here, errors are good. We want to just keep them small. Small errors are a good thing over here. Here, and in fact, it's fine if they're frequent. We want frequent small errors. Here, the danger is rare, large errors. So we want systems that are going to constantly test out ideas, that are going to constantly allow us to play around with things. And part of the key will be here, a lot of these are going to be irreversible. Humpty Dumpty fell off the wall, had a great fall. All the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put him back together again. We want small errors that are reversible, where we can actually adapt as a result and get stronger through the adaptation. So how do we do that? Go ahead. AI. Ooh, actually, yeah, okay, good. Think about two different approaches to developing a program that's going to perform a task, where you realize this task isn't something as simple as adding a column of numbers or doing a certain computation. It actually has to help us with decision making in the real world. Do we want this complicated system of rules? And if something goes wrong, we realize, oh, now what? This is complicated and revising the rules is going to be difficult. Or do we want something like an adaptive network that allows us to incorporate that information and, in effect, revise as we go? So you might say, in AI terms, it's not so much that this is like non-AI and this is more like, I don't know, a von Neumann serial type of system. And this is like a non-von system. This is like distributed parallel processing. And it's, in that sense, like a sort of neural net. This is the way the brain does things. It doesn't have a set of rules that it simply applies to new situations. It's highly adaptive. It has all these networks, and they adjust in response to circumstances, right? And so here you might say, look, we've just got to come up with the right rules and write rules that are going to allow us to encompass all these situations. So we think we better anticipate everything and have a rule for that. Here, the thought is, look, we're not going to do that. We want something that is adaptive. And what are we going to use instead of rules? Well, we're going to have certain heuristics. We're going to have certain things that we develop in practice, and we continue to refine in practice. So think about two different approaches to becoming good at something. This approach says, oops, well, what? Go to people who are really good at it and say, what do you do? And have them teach you what they do. Okay, say, well, here are the rules. And look, there's a place for that. In fact, it's not as if here we're going to ignore books and rules and things like that. But we are going to say, well, that's not the whole thing. Okay? So let's think about something you actually would like to become good at. Okay? Suppose you're interested in music and you want to get good at playing an instrument. Well, one way to do that is to say, what are the rules for being a good X? Okay? So you might think, I need to know the rules for playing jazz piano, let's say. And you study jazz theory. You think, oh, okay, here's what it is. So you think, here are a bunch of chord progressions now in my head, and here are the scales I should play over those progressions, and blah, 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 and you practice getting fast at them. Well, that's one way to do it. But another way to do it is you just play a lot, and you talk to a lot of people, and you try things out. You think, that sounds cool. Or, oh, that's terrible. Right? And, you know, the best thing is probably some combination of those. The guys I know who are superb jazz musicians, they are playing all the time. They have some general heuristics, but they adapt. They do something and they think that's great, or they think, that didn't work out. Let's try something else. And that's not to say they aren't aware of all of this, but they don't just apply the rules. It's not like, oh, gosh, here it is. So what chord do I play to lead into that half diminished? Here's my answer, right? They try things out and they sit there and think, yeah, okay, I've got to go back to this half diminished chord. What do I do? And they try things and think, oh, that works. And sometimes then they can explain why it works. And usually they can come up with some explanation. I'm always embarrassed because I think, oh, that sounds really good. Why does that work? I don't get it. And they usually turn around to me, you tell me, why does that work? And I usually can't explain it. So even when I manage to do something well over here, I rarely understand why it's working. But now there's a real danger to that kind of retrospective, here's why it worked thing, because it's tending to push you in this direction. The people who use these and try to get by with these alone, Taleb refers to as fragilistas. How do I, let's see, oh man, I've left out half the vowels in this word. So, fragilistas. Okay, they're the people who basically are the, you might say, intellectuals of fragility. He sometimes refers to them as the Harvard Soviet School of understanding things. They have elaborate theories. Oh, you want to understand Middle Eastern politics and what's likely to be the next large black swan emerging from the Middle East? Well, we have elaborate theories, and we will give many talks, and we create institutions and centers at universities to investigate this. And his view is, look, all of that's basically pointless. It's not that that knowledge is irrelevant, though it might be. The real question is, all right, something weird those people aren't going to anticipate is going to happen, and then what? So even since September 11th, the Arab Spring, nobody predicted that. And so what do you do about that? Well, it requires the ability to engage in a different kind of decision making, where you go in admitting, look, there's a lot here I don't know. So the real question is, how do you get into a mode of decision making that allows you to take advantage of responses to these unpredictable events? instead of just trying to predict them and trying to set up a rule for what you do to either prevent them or to respond to them. That's a different kind of decision making. And so what we're going to do next time is try to understand what that kind of decision making is. How do you go about doing it? But there are all sorts of dangers. And to give you an idea of the dangers, think about all of the things that tend to bedevil us when we engage in inductive reasoning. We tend to assume that the future is going to be just like the past. But that's part of the problem with black swans. They change the future in a way that it's not like the past. Imagine writing a book in 1910 about what the world will look like in 2010. Okay? Could you have predicted the First World War, the Second World War, the rise and then sudden fall of communism? In fact, I mean, I think about the huge black swan events I've lived through. Surely 1989, and then 1991, the collapse of the Soviet Union, the fall of the Berlin Wall, it's all of that. Nobody was predicting that. And then, before that, you go back to the Vietnam War. Nobody predicted that that would be a war that would last so long, cost so many lives, be so utterly fruitless in the end. No one predicted. Well, actually, here's the thing that's really embarrassing. In the 1950s, there was a very popular artistic and literary and, in general, intellectual movement, futurism. Reflecting an earlier, Italian futurism and so on, but this one much more optimistic. We have a vision of the future. And it was like the Jetsons with flying cars, Where'd that future go? There are no flying cars. Those 1950s conceptions of what the future looks like now look ridiculous. Why? Because of that. So how do we sensibly make decisions when we really can't anticipate the future? That's what we'll talk about next time.